The views and opinions expressed in these historical letters that may contain vernacular used in the World War II era, the post-war era, and the Cold War era do not reflect the views and opinions of any of the individuals involved with this project, including, but not limited to, the podcast's creators. Morning, Jamie.
Morning, Allison.
How are you doing this morning?
Well, I got my coffee, so I'm fine.
I do have my coffee. I'm using a very special mug here that I picked up at the Japanese tea garden when I was out in Portland, Oregon back in 2023 of the pine trees. Oh my gosh, we're really barreling towards the end of what letter-wise we have for 1945, heading towards the end of World War II. And we're going to end World War II today. I'm just going to...
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, we're going to conclude World War II in this episode. Now, for everybody that's listening, before we get into the details of this episode, if you're new listeners, welcome to the Love Sweetie podcast. I think you're going to be able to follow this episode pretty easily today, but certainly please go back into that library now of episodes, because this is episode 42, so you can catch up the rest of World War II if that's your interest. Absolutely. There's a lot to be said there. Thank you to all of our returning listeners. We really appreciate our audience. For those that are watching on YouTube, if you can, please like, share, and subscribe to the Love Sweetie podcast channel. Click that bell for the notifications so that you know when new episodes are available. And then also for those that are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the other audio-only channels, anytime there's going to be some, I should say, for this episode, there is going to be some content, some pictures and things to look at. Make sure you're checking out our website at www.lovesweetiepodcast.com, but we will take the time, of course, to describe what is on the screen so you can still continue to listen. But this is one episode where I would strongly encourage checking out some of the new pictures of artifacts and things that are going to be showing up on the website as we are talking about the end of World War II. But back to the storyline. We're not just talking about the end of World War II. Sweetie's got her story going on, and at this point in the story, she's pretty pregnant.
Oh, she's very pregnant.
She's very pregnant.
In the middle of Iowa. In the middle of summer.
In the summer, the hottest time of the year.
Yes. But so we have 3 letters today.
Mm-hmm.
And not only are we going to be hearing from Sweetie, but we are going to be hearing from the good... Oh, I'm so excited. We're going to be hearing from the good doctor.
Yep, her dad.
Yes. Yes. But our first letter, this was one of the things that always interests me whenever I read through these letters. This was not dated.
No, it was not.
So can you tell us a little bit about your process for figuring out where this letter went?
Sure. Yeah. And this comes up every now and then. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the letters are not dated. And I do have the advantage of having an envelope with a postmark, so we can get a lot closer. This letter didn't have that advantage. So we're relying completely on the context of what's occurring in the letter to be able to set it at the right place. Fortunately, she's talking about how uncomfortable she is being pregnant. So we can say, okay.
So that really narrows it down.
That narrows it down to a certain time frame. We also know she's in Iowa, so we know it's not the beginning of the pregnancy because she wasn't home yet. So we can just keep narrowing down those time frames. And then when we look at the particularities of just little things that she's mentioning, we were able to basically date this to mid-July. I strongly suspect that this is before the next letter. The second letter that we'll review today is from July 22nd. I strongly suspect that this is from prior to that. But the letter previous to this from the last episode that we had was in June. And it didn't feel like it was a June 1945 letter, which is why we're starting with this letter today. But yeah, it is a process, definitely.
Yes.
To try to act as a detective to work out the dates on some of these letters. But I'm happy we were able to for this one. But yeah, I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. This is the penultimate episode of season 1 of the Love Sweetie podcast. What a moment. What a moment. Next week, for our listeners, don't miss next week's episode. I'm going to say this early in the episode, just so not, because there's a lot we're going to be covering at the end, and I don't want to forget to say this. Next week is the season 1 finale of the Love Sweetie podcast as we conclude 1945. And then the week right after it, there's no break.
No breaks.
Season 2 is going to begin after that. So, first letter, penultimate episode of season 1. Here we go. Mid-July, 1945. Your letter came this PM before I had mailed your letter, so I'll add a note to put in. I have already written you about the dresses, and I believe you should not try to buy any more for me, for they'll not fit. and it is almost as much trouble to alter as to make one from scratch. Do either send or bring the bat and lining for the quilt, for I want very much to at least try to get the quilt done before Lou comes. If you can't come with Frank, then send it, for I'm most anxious to get it done. You know, Lou has always said I must not get it started and leave it half finished, and I believe his main reason was because it was a gift from you. He'd be much pleased to have it finished, I know. We did send the backer off to Marion first thing Monday morning. Thanks for the stamps. Lou will be pleased. I'd not buy any more of the Roosevelt threes. I believe they'll be pretty common, but do try to get a block of the new Iwo Jima series. Yeah, so one of the clues here with dating this letter is she's talking about the stamps. And sometimes it's just something as little as that can place the date on this. In the previous letter, they were talking about some of the stamps, and we know that they're becoming bigger stamp collectors, but they mentioned the Iwo Jima series, so that also puts it out there. But the seems like she's home sewing at this point, staying off her feet. Yeah.
And we learned in the last episode that Jeanne had bought 2 maternity dresses for her,
and
that they were both too small.
Yep.
So, her saying, I've already written you about the dresses.
Right.
So yeah, so you can kind of place these things. These are just, it's almost like it's a little mystery. It's, doing some detective work, and it's really fun. And I definitely want to give you the credit due for that, because it's amazing to me that you're able to do this kind of stuff. But yeah, so she's working on her quilt, and she's ready for Lou. Lou's going to be coming home. We learned in the last episode that he kept getting dates and that they kept getting pushed off,
pushing
and
it out.
coming. So she's still kind of waiting for that. And she knows he's going to be coming home.
Yeah. And the other thing to bear in mind here is, as people know, and if they haven't caught up with the Love Sweetie podcast at this point, Lou's in England right now. Lou arrived in the European theater of the war about a week or two before that side of the war ended, which is pretty interesting timing for him. But he does arrive in England when it's active, and then Germany surrenders. So in the meantime, he's over there, and he's basically pretty safe over there because all of the action now is the war against Japan. So as much as we're going to talk a lot about the conclusion of the end of the war with Japan at the end of this episode, at the time of this letter, bear in mind, there is still no knowledge of the atomic bomb. And it's going on behind the scenes. And her brothers, at least Frank, we know, is most likely in the South Pacific, is that he's involved in this. So as much as she makes no mention of it here, and as we wind down in 1945, and we say today in 2025, oh, well, they're going to drop the bomb, and then the war is going to be over. Still unknown, very active front going on in the Pacific. Have you seen the dark set in comparison to the light bed and dresser? In one of his recent letters, he said he'd like to help pick it out. However, if the order has to be placed months in advance, go ahead and order it. If it will not take but a very little while, I'd like to wait until Lou gets here. Would you care? We might even be able to know by then where it could be shipped. I don't quite know which to order, but if you've seen them both and like one better than the other, you select it and surprise us. Lou is as undecided as I am. Is blocking permanent, or do you destroy the blocking when the Afghan is washed or dry cleaned? If the blocking is permanent, make it 40 by 60. The square would be nice to use when the baby is little, though. Make it big 40 by 60. I have no intentions of wearing the pajamas now, but I'd like to see them, so you might bring them with you if you come. I'm anxious to see them all, though you may be pretty well loaded down. You use your own judgment about bringing all these things. It may take a little while for Daddy to give the guard a good going over, and since he'll have to come down here to unload the fruit jars, we will fix dinner. We'll see you Saturday a.m. Love, Sweetie. Yep.
So in these letters, when she's in Iowa and she's writing, you can see the change in her tone, because she's not really so much describing like what's going on because they're far apart,
Right.
She's more like kind of doing necessary work. Like, okay, don't send me these. Let's do this. Is this going to be here? Okay, I'll see you Saturday. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, so she's home.
She's happy to be home. She's I remember how many episodes did we focus on these letters from Kansas where all she wanted to do was see her sister? And it's like, are we going to see you this weekend? Are you going to come this weekend? And for months and months, all through that, it was almost torturous all through the fall of 1944, where it's just Lou and Sweetie. They know nobody there. And they're just hoping that Jeanne will visit, and how many times Jeanne didn't, or things like that. Now it's the opposite. So yeah, it's like the day-to-day checklist, which is really funny. The other thing I love about the second portion of this letter, and this is another thing that dated when this letter was from, is the discussion about the purchase of the dresser for the baby's room. And if you go back and listen to episode 41, which features one of Lou's letters, we have the commentary from Lou about the shopping for the furniture. I'm not going to spoil it here for anybody that didn't listen to episode 41. Go back and listen to this episode. Lou's commentary about trying to advise on how to shop for things while he's in England is fantastic. So I want you to experience that for yourselves. Go back and listen. If you listen to anything from this episode, go back and listen to the previous episodes of that particular letter that he writes from England. But yeah, just day to day, we're certainly heading towards what should be the due date here. And I guess we are in the third trimester at this point. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yes, but on to our second letter.
Yep. Next letter. Now we do have a date for this one.
Yeah.
It's important.
Lacona, Iowa, July 22nd, 1945. Dear Jeanne, after you left, we went out to the farm and Mom and I picked a couple of buckets of beans, while Daddy hoed in the strawberry bed. It was so hot that I sweated enough that it trickled down my glasses, and I had to look cross-eyed to see around the rivers. We weren't gone but an hour and a half, but I was ready to fall flat on my face before we got back. I washed my face and went to lie down, and I couldn't get up again. As a result, the dishes didn't get washed, and nothing else got done either. The folks had to go to Liberty Center, and I stayed alone. It was so hot that hardly anybody slept last night. Today is so hot and sticky, I can hardly sit still. This a.m., Mom and I did the whole passel of dishes and canned 11 pints of green beans. It wasn't such a terrible job, especially since Mom did the real work, and I just held the cab. They look real nice, and I can't help but partially claim them. I've spent most of this day writing letters. Pretty icky, too, since my arm sticks to the page with each word I write.
Yeah.
I can't imagine canning 11 pints of green beans.
It's a lot of green beans.
Of summer.
Mm-hmm.
In a hot kitchen with no air. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And there's no indoor plumbing in this house. We did confirm it's an outhouse and everything else. So, I mean, this is old, sort of the old town living that's going on in the 40s in a small town in the Midwest. It's great that they're self-sufficient, that they have the farm. Chester, for once, is not puttering around. He's actually gathering strawberries.
Oh my gosh, is it productive puttering?
Yeah, he's productive puttering right now.
Oh, good for him.
I also love this term that she uses, which just speaks to her level of intelligence and how much Chester focused on the education of his children. Words come up that I would never think to use in just a casual letter about what's going on. This word passel is very, very fascinating to me. She did the whole passel of dishes, and I'd never heard passel referred to in dishes. A passel is simply a group of items of an unnumbered type. So, like, you're not really sure how many there are, but it's just like a bunch. It's like a fill-in for that. But apparently it can be used for things just as mundane as just doing dishes. So I do challenge everybody, the next time you're going to go wash some dishes, just say, hey, I'm going to be washing this passel of dishes, and you'll be picking
this entire
up from
passel.
Yeah, this entire
passel. And then next time you play Scrabble or Upwards or something, throw that one in there.
Yeah, that's a good Scrabble one. Yeah,
but and actually, you could do like instead of if somebody does pass, you could add EL onto it. Boom.
Yeah, I think it's a lesser known word for sure, but yeah, it's an unidentified number of items and things like that. So that's what it refers to. Other than that, day-to-day work once again, but we get a bit more of a description and how hot it is, that her arm's sticking to the page. I don't know how many people would write that little line. Pretty icky too, since my arm sticks to the page with each word that I write. I don't know if they'd take the time to do it, but she paints this scene and she always writes what's going on so specifically. And so we absolutely can just tell what the weather was like back then.
Mom and I went through all the things you brought again and again. I'm so open-mouthed I hardly know how to thank you. I stood like a pop-eyed goon yesterday and couldn't say much. I never can. So I'll try to write it. The slinky house coat is really a beauty, one of those things I look at and don't hope to own. You knew how well it would go with the slippers I bought. I'm so anxious to wear it, and now more than ever, I'd like for the baby to come before Lou gets home. With such a wardrobe, I'd feel more like a bride than I did in December 1943. The pajamas will make perfect bed jackets along with your bed jacket and the shorty nightgown. Like Mom says, I'll be the best dressed mama in the hospital. I hope that after the baby is born, I can whittle me down and get my hips in those size 13 pants. To say thank you is so inadequate. To say, what do I owe you, would rile you. So how can I get across to you my real appreciation? I guess I can only say that when the time comes for your young'uns to arrive, that you'll let Lou and me do only a part of the things for you that you've done for us. Know that we both appreciate it very much. And when I say, thank you so very much, I'm trying to say all I mean and think. I know you're busy and that your job must of necessity come first with you now, judging from your checks. It should, but I hope you'll get to come home for a visit soon.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the 1945 set of letters is how she's trying to convey her thanks without being too much. And she somewhat is too much by describing what she means, but she's very specific. It's that specific nature of when I say, thank you so very much, it contains at any point in the future. And she's had moments in these letters where she said this before to Jeanne. It means all of this taken together, and it always will. It's such a sincerity in these phrases. And we know she's still kind of journaling, right? She's using the letter writing as a sort of journaling for what's going on. But she's taken a moment back right here at the end of 1945, right before she's about to be due. And she steps back from it for a moment and then says, Jeanne, when you have kids, it will absolutely be the same. I will do as much as I can. Lou and I will do as much as we can. So who knows in the future if that's actually going to happen with regards to Jeanne. But it's amazing to see the sentiment here already in 1945. So it's absolutely beautiful. I hope people do write to their loved ones like this today, whether it's by chat, text, email, whatever it is. But I get the sense that it's a rare thing when the letters so sort of perfectly articulate the sincerity of thought that we see from some of Sweetie's letters. And this page, this portion overall, it brings tears to my eye because it just speaks so close to their relationship. But yeah, and it's one of the last letters we have from 45 as well, but just so beautiful.
And I know that you grew up with your grandmother and you got to see their relationship.
Yeah.
This is incredibly special to have this letter just for this moment in time, capture this.
Yeah.
And keep it. Because when you have a relationship like this, and we can see, and it was a lifetime relationship.
Yeah.
It's very see, now I'm getting teared up.
Yeah, it's really emotional. It's a very easy passage to read, but then when you think about it so much and how much sincerity and genuine thought there is behind this passage. I mean, all she said that day was like they were taking care of beans and they were writing. I don't know what she was writing to everybody else, what she was writing potentially to Lou that we never see or anything like that.
Oh, she was writing her vitamin letter to Lou as well.
She was right. She said the vitamin letter and things like that. But she stops for this moment and gives this passage of time. And there's a sentiment that Jeanne has. We'll save it for a little later. It's one of the last things we know that Jeanne actually writes. And I said this at the beginning of the podcast, and it's nice at the end of season 1 here to sort of reflect back some of the key things said, especially if people haven't heard some of the earlier episodes. In the very first episode 0, which is 15 minutes and describes the project, Jeanne is the very last of all of the Demaree siblings to pass away. She passes away in 2011. The other thing that's said is Sweetie passes away in 2009. So in this interim period, Jeanne reflects back on her relationships with other family members and writes a document. And we'll get into that document probably in a few episodes about the relationship between this new baby that's due and Aunt Jeanne. But it's amazing that this sentiment that's expressed today carries all the way through and can be clearly heard from Jeanne's perspective in 2011, about a year before she passes away. And she's the last one to go. So it's really fascinating. And I know we're spending a lot of time talking about this, but this relationship is the critical core to the entire series of letters. And like, there's no reason for there to be anything other than authentic and just a genuine expression of thought. I think people today struggle with expressing, that we express our real feelings.
Mm-hmm.
There's no struggle here. And it's beautiful to see that. And it's mundane and average, and there's a beautiful nature of the simplicity of that. So
Sweetie understands how much she loves her sister.
Yeah.
And she knows that she can't ever adequately express how much she loves her.
Yeah.
And she's going to try, but
she's always going to try. It's always going to come up. This is one of those moments where it does. And she's at this moment where she knows her world is about to change. Their world is about to change as this new element comes in. So, but yeah, we'll continue on from there. We could talk about this for a long time.
Talk about it forever, but yes.
I wanted to draw all the attention to just how important that is.
There's so much to do before Lou comes that I'm sick of the whole situation, and it seems that crying is as easy as breathing. To try it alone is like one termite trying to chew the Empire State Building down single-handedly. So is the work here. And instead of keeping at it, I get desperate and bawl. But here it is, July 22nd. Lou writes they will be ready to leave there at the end of the month. 10 days. If they fly home, and I believe they will, that gives me an extra 20 hours instead of 8 days for boat crossing allowed. 2 days to get here, and I'm caught with my pants dragging. You saw the upstairs, and my room's upstairs and downstairs, and I have to make the dress. It is useless to try to buy one and have to alter it. If I could have worn the gray one, I'd never have sent it back. Daddy can't be interested in a thing as to the house, and I feel like a real heel to cry and drive Mom to do things when it is so terribly hot, and so I haw about it. Sound pretty gripey, don't I? Well, I am, I guess. I'd liked to talk with you more, but it was impossible, and besides, I couldn't begin to say how much I like the things you brought. I do, and I appreciate them all. Almost as much as I appreciate you. Love, Sweetie.
Yeah.
This poor woman, this is her first pregnancy. I'm sure the hormones are all over the place. Her husband is not with her. And she's like, oh, all I do is bawl. Like, honey.
All I do is cry.
Of course, that's all you can do. That's okay. And then Chester, he's like, no, the house is not of my concern. I must putter.
Yeah, I'm over here. I got this new farm. And it's literally miles away. Like, it's not severely. It's like at least 2 to 3 miles away. So he has
to take his little car there, right?
Yeah, he's not just like outside in like the neighbor like farm area.
Yeah, you can be just like, hey, Dad, can you come here?
Yeah, you can't holler at Chester to be like, yo, hey, doctor, your daughter's pregnant. Maybe you could help out here.
And let me just point out, he bought the farm and then he bought the house. So he's like, the house is going to be over here, and he didn't buy a house close. He didn't build a house. He was like, no, I want to be able to be at my farm, and then my family will be here.
Yeah. Well, he is going to move his practice inside the house, so that's the other thing. There is a practical nature to that. I'm just glad Laura's like that she's with her mom. Like, that's really good. She's actually not talking about Laura too much here because I think it's just understood Laura's taking care of business.
Well, Laura's, I mean, but like she's also pregnant, and Laura, I think it's just like, let's go pick beans and wash dishes.
Yeah. Yeah, she gets it. At this point, Laura's had 5 children. Sweetie's the last of her children, so she's been through it.
That's true. She has. She knows what it's like.
Yeah, and there's not too many other. Well, Jeanne hasn't had any kids. Sister, we actually don't hear about sister. She's she's not that far away. She's had 2 children at this point. Because there's Chris and there's M.A. We don't hear any talk about sister in these letters. You know, we don't hear anything about Florence. We don't hear anything about the brothers. Right now, her sole focus is what's going on, and that makes sense. But the last little thing I love about the end of this letter is when she gives this line about the termite. There's so much to do, so she's overwhelmed, right? And she says, to try it alone is like one termite trying to chew the Empire State Building down single-handedly. So she's giving us this kind of an interesting visual detail of just how overwhelmed that she is.
Yeah, and even if it's not that much to do, it feels, and I'm sure there's things that she wants prepared and ready for Lou when he gets there, and it's not turning out that way.
Yeah.
That can be very frustrating as well.
Oh, yeah.
But again, we see how much she appreciates her sister.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that that's a nice outlet for her to kind of get those things out. But
yep,
we are going to be leaving Sweetie there.
For this episode, yeah.
For this episode.
We'll hear from Sweetie one more time. I believe one more time in the finale here, of course. But we're getting really, really close to her due date. So Sweetie's focused on things other than writing letters by the time we get into the next months. But the next day, Mr. I'm going to go putter around the garden and not pay attention to what's going on at the house I just bought, has decided to tell us what is going on. So July 23rd, here comes Sweetie's father, Dr. Chester Demaree.
Lacona, Iowa, July 23rd, 1945. Dear Jeanne, we received your letter this afternoon, and I will try to answer some of your questions. As regards tannic acid for burns, it is now recognized that plain sterile Vaseline, petrolatum, is far superior to the use of tannic acid. It is much simpler of use. The petrolatum is often applied to the burned areas without first cleansing the area and without using antisepsis. It seems to relieve pain and conserves body heat where shock is imminent or already present. One does not have to wait for the pre-cleansing, but can apply the Vaseline coating while other procedures are being used. One of the disadvantages of tannic acid is that it forms a hard eschar, which often becomes infected underneath and holds the infection in the wound. Also, there is a certain constant percentage of scarring with the tannic acid, which it is claimed does not follow with the Vaseline. My zinc oxide treatment is a latter stage of the Vaseline treatment, and as the Vaseline is generally more fluid than the zinc oxide ointment, it is not so well to use it in the first stages of burns. However, if zinc oxide is the only thing present, possibly it might be used in selected cases. This is about all I know about using Vaseline for burns. 4 years ago, it was not considered good judgment to use it as they do now.
Okay, yeah, so this is awesome, first of all. And this is kind of interesting because Vaseline, like I was telling Allison, is my go-to.
Yep.
And I'm sure it's a lot of other people's go-to. Yep. But that it's like in 1945, they were still using tannic acid for burns.
Right. And only a short while before, he says 4 years ago, so in 41, Vaseline was not really considered. Now, for our audience, and I'm going to say this, and I understand this is common sense for, I would imagine, everybody listening to this podcast. Dr. Chester Demaree is an MD from the 1940s at this time period, 80 years ago. Talk to your doctor before doing anything, and do not try these things at home without talking to your doctor. Do not take Chester's advice from 80 years ago as current medical advice that you should be following today. So I'm always going to disclaim it, even though I'm assuming everybody understands that, but I'm not even going to make that assumption. Tannic acid, that sounds uncomfortable.
That doesn't, not only does it sound uncomfortable, it really doesn't sound like it did anything good. It forms a hard eschar. See, there's another. But I just really love how he kind of just jumps into the like, hi, he's not like, hello, I hope you're doing well and everything's going. This is all that I know about tannic acid and Vaseline for burn. There you go.
And then he talks about his own treatment. We remind ourselves that Chester has the ability to compound his own medicines, and he makes this zinc oxide ointment. And as it would turn out, because I'm guessing, though I'm not a scientist or a doctor, that zinc oxide treatment, I'm assuming, does not really go bad because it's in the level of like a Vaseline, that my dad still has some of Chester's zinc oxide treatment and still uses it to this day. So we're going to work on getting a clip up of what that is, and we will get that documented so people can see that. It was not compounded by anybody else except for Chester. I believe it's in some sort of can or something. I don't know if that's healthy. So if there's like a medical professional listening to this being like, what are you doing? Yeah. Well, yeah. So we are also reminded, because we can joke about Chester out puttering around a farm a lot. You know, he's this for those that missed these earlier episodes, he's a 32nd degree Mason. He's a naturalist. He's involved in different things. He was writing sermons for the preacher at one point in the storyline. Go back to that episode. That's hilarious. That he was trying to go into his religious, and he's having a good time with that. So he's going to write like a dozen more. He's an OB, and he's a very good OB. And to this day, the town remembers him very, very well. He was the doctor in school, of course, taking care of like early elementary stuff. So there are some people that still remember being treated by Dr. Demaree. I like having this portion because we get a good dose of the doctor side of Dr. Demaree, and we get these little pieces of medical history. And then, of course, he's going to go into some other commentary. But it's nice to see the doctor side of Chester fully represented in this page.
July 28th, 1945. You see, we've neglected to get this off, and it's still unfinished. We have been busy, have been out to the farm and conferred with the AAA regarding a farm program for next year. Also have been talking over the supervision of a building of a pond on the place as a source of water and also for use as a fish pond. It may cost us some $250 without the $75 the government will give us as part of payment or the project. If we do it, it will be this year. We will decide this during the coming week. Another disadvantage of tanic acid I forgot to mention, it is more or less painful when first used. We are going to have chicken for dinner tomorrow and hope to have enough. Besides, we will have an apple cobbler if Mama can get the time to make it. I got some yellow transparent apples here in town, and they will be all that we get this year. Lou is coming home, so Sweetie thinks. I am not sure that he will get here, and may go on to the east before he lands here. It appears that the war may be over soon, though to listen to the reports from the Japs it does not seem possible. I will have to get this into the mail if I get it mailed this week. Love, Papa.
There was so much to this letter, even though it was very short for a Chester letter.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's clearly busy because he writes about the tannic acid. He probably was like, oh, that's very interesting. I want to write about that. And then 5 days later, he comes back to the letter to finish it. And but this was really kind of interesting. Like when he's talking about like the $250 to do a pond, and that there's a government program like for $75. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that AAA. I did look into that. That's called the Agricultural Adjustment Act. It was put in place by Roosevelt, and the description here is it was for farmers by raising the prices of crops and paying them for land not used. So when they had vacant areas, it's along those lines. It has to do with the property, but I'm sure there's people that might want to go further into some of the farming, the agricultural history. That's called the Agricultural Adjustment Act.
And then too, here, this is really funny. This is actually something I've had conversations with other people before. So I garden, and and I make a lot of my family's food. I was talking with somebody about gardening, and she's like, "Well, what if you, in the middle of winter, want something like that you can't grow?" And I was like, "Well, then you don't get it."
Yeah.
It's just like I said, it's actually a very recent concept that we are able to go to the store at any time of the year, 24/7, 360. Yeah. Well, not anymore, but every day, and pick up whatever we want.
Yeah.
And here he's saying, he's like, I got these apples, and it's July, and I have these apples, and we're not probably, and that wasn't something like, it wasn't a bad thing. Yeah. It just was like, well, we're not going to get any more apples this year.
It's the idea of eating seasonally, right? And you're right, it's completely kind of vanished because the just-in-time system that we have, especially in the first world, to be able to get anything that we want out of season, these things kind of go away. There's still like a seasonality things, of course. Like we were talking before, pumpkin spice latte. We're all going to start drinking that like August, September. It's the fall.
Yeah.
But I mean, Starbucks could, or the other companies could put that out in like April because they have access to it. This wasn't even a consideration back then. So yeah, it's a good thing to bring up the seasonality of things there.
And he also is, talking again about, he's thinking that Lou's going to come home too, hopefully, but he's being pragmatic,
right?
Given that and we are going to see actually,
right?
Now,
we're going to talk about
the articles about it, scene. So he actually, he's not thinking that, oh, he's going to come back. He's thinking, oh, we're going to keep
sent over.
This war.
This is going. Chester, with all of his intelligence, with all of his connections, with everything that he can sense, leaves that line. What does he say? Lou's coming home. So Sweetie thinks, I'm not so sure that he will get here. He may go on to the east before he lands here. And the critical line here is, it appears that the war may be over soon, though, and this is the part, to listen to the reports from the Japs, it does not seem possible. So he's following very intently what's going on. To listen to the Japs, it does not seem possible. They're going to fight this out to the bitter end, and land invasion of Japan is coming. And that's when we know that the entire storyline of this thing for World War II, the ending of World War II, is going to end so differently from every other war in human history. And we have to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
We absolutely have to talk about that. So I've got some headlines here coming from the Des Moines Register. I've been going through these last headlines because things happen in very quick succession. And we're covering this now. We're going into August of 1945 because the next letter we're going to have for the finale episode next week, check out the finale of season 1, is going to be from, I believe, August 25th. So all of this is happening prior to when we start the letters for the next episode here. But I'm going to go ahead and share screen. This is the news paper headline. This is the Des Moines Register. All these articles are coming from the Des Moines Register because I believe that's the paper that Chester would have. He lives just an hour south of Des Moines, and there would be no greater coverage. And of course, he has a read here on what's going on. So I have to imagine this is the paper that he was reading. Certainly the paper Jeanne is reading in Des Moines. But this is from Monday morning in Iowa and Des Moines on August 6th. And the important thing here about why this is a big headline, it says for our audio listeners, 580 B-29s, so 580 B-29s, so planes, lashed the Jap cities. So they're talking about what's going on with the war, and there's an interesting cartoon here about science and progress and things like this. There's no indication anywhere on this page that something's about to happen in Japan. This is like the headlines that they're reading from the previous days. We saw the headlines from the Tokyo bombing that had occurred, talking about the B-29s. This is sort of, unfortunately, status quo for war, right? This is August 6th. This is, on August 6th, the first bomb is being dropped on Hiroshima. So the news hasn't covered it yet, right? We have the time delay. But there's no sign of it here. Now, with the timing, this coming out Monday morning, right? Time difference, things like that. We have to wonder, and I wanted to show the issue, the headline, the day prior to the news breaking that the atomic bomb exists. And it's typical paper. Now I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to go to the headline that follows on August 7th. And this is the next headline, just to sort of contrast this. The next headline at the Des Moines Register for the morning of Tuesday morning, August 7th, 1945 is Harness Atomic Power, ! For audio listeners. Science's fearful weapon ushers in strange new world. Secret kept for 5 years. Use of bomb raises moral issue.
Wow.
What a headline.
What a
wake
headline.
Up to the next morning.
Yeah, exactly. Especially thinking like the day before that. Yeah.
Yep. If you're Chester and you're a doctor, he has his MD, right? He's at the highest level of the Masons as far as academics go. He's at the highest level of science as a doctor. And you wake up the next morning and that's your front page.
Oh, Allison, and for our audio listeners, the entire page is nothing but stuff about the bomb. There's glare visible for 120 miles to blind girl.
Yeah,
even
and that's
in
from
labs.
the test. That's from the test.
That's from the test.
Yeah.
West Coast plant producing atomic bombs. Like,
yeah. I'm going to show the
energy freed by device in cosmic bomb. Like, this is the entire, the entire page is nothing but about the bomb.
Yeah, here's the bottom half of the page as well. I'm going to show that just so you can see, which usually I've just been showing the headlines, but I think it's important. This is, if you were to read down the paper, say it's folded over, it's showing how the uranium atom would explode basically to create this power. Now, I'm no scientist, but I think people could follow this very basically. imagine like the level of reading. Here's the paper the next morning saying, here's how the science is like theoretically and like philosophically, this is how this would work and what they would expect to be. But there is something missing from this paper because we're so caught up on, imagine you're reading, it's like, oh my God. Hiroshima is not mentioned on the front page where it was dropped.
Oh.
Isn't that amazing? I'm going to go back now to that headline just so people can look for it because I know the natural inclination is going to be like, wait, what? They talked about the test, and that's why it's important. They talked about where they made the bomb. They talked about what the bomb's supposed to do. They talk about the morality of the bomb. So the natural question is, if this is on the headline, well, they must have dropped it somewhere. And we know they dropped it in Japan. Japan, date and time, August 6th. We saw the paper from August 6th. This is now the 7th. Enough time has passed for time zones to make sense. Hiroshima, where it's dropped, and the effect of dropping it on Japan. It doesn't say it was dropped on Japan. It's not mentioning Japan. It's mentioning, look at this power we have. At this point, the bomb has already been dropped. And there's no... To me, that's amazing. That's fascinating to have no mention of why would the public know this, but then not see that it was dropped.
They, I think that they wanted that disconnect.
Yeah.
They wanted to like you said, this was to show that the U.S. had the power, and they do raise the moral issue, which is, obviously we've talked about this many times, like how awful this was and what Truman had to do and the decision that was upon his shoulders.
Yep.
And you're right, they don't say like, oh, by the way, we dropped it on this town and killed this many innocent people.
It is dropped by now. Now, they are going to say this the next day because I do have the next day's headline. But it's interesting how they divide this up. Because this is total shock. There's been nothing like this. So here, I'm going to go to August 8th. And I think it's important to show the 3 days together. The one where it's before, like, this isn't coming. And then here we have, this is August 8th's paper. So Monday morning hasn't happened yet in Iowa time. Tuesday morning paper. Oh my gosh, look at this power we have. Moral question. August 8th. Oh, by the way, it was dropped.
So it really we didn't know it was dropped until the 7th.
There's at least on the front page. Say you have a person that's only reading the front page. Because it's like today, watch YouTube videos, like clickbait, all that other kind of stuff. If they're only reading the front page, it's saying there was a test. But then you have the next morning, destroy 60% of the city.
Okay, I was wondering what the PC team thinking.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this headline for audio listeners, Wednesday morning, August 8th in Des Moines Register says, destroy 60% of city. That's the headline, ! 4 square miles of Hiroshima gone. Blast equals 2,000 B-29s. And we have this image that appears. It says the atom's on the loose. And it's the world hiding behind this fence with its hat blown off. And I guess this is the representation of the atom. It looks sort of like a boxing, like just like a circle, like a sphere with very interesting arms and legs that's going after the world with like, I guess some sort of like radar kind of lightning looking effect. Because how is a person supposed to think about this? And then
and it's really weird too, because it like in this cartoon, there's a chain that's been broken, a chain and a cup that's been broken.
It's been unleashed. Yeah,
it just gives the impression that this was something that it broke out of, that we've always had the power, and then here it is breaking out, and that's really not the case. The case is that it was developed and created.
Yeah,
like this actually, I feel like, is also another maybe misdirection for the public. That, there was the power and we unleashed it. No, like, you made it so that it was this way.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't something that you stumbled upon. Like, this was a creation for death.
For death.
That's what
on a large scale. On a
large scale.
Yeah.
Strange. And so a lot of the other, a lot of the other, like, here's the other one. The B-52 pilot of atomic bomb was born in Des Moines.
Yeah.
You see that one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, so this is incredibly interesting, like the way that this was portrayed to the American public.
It is. I kind of do appreciate the day before where the moral question is raised immediately. that's fascinating. It wasn't just they wake up the next morning and, oh, we have this major victory against the Japanese by dropping this amazingly powerful new weapon on Hiroshima. No, the first thing that comes up is, we're in a strange new world here, and is this moral? And then the next day, it was dropped in Hiroshima. I didn't expect to see that when I was going to go look at the headlines of this. I didn't expect to see that progression coming across the papers, which was really fascinating. And we'll get to Nagasaki here in a moment for people who are like, okay, well, that's not the only one. There were two. But for this portion, we're going to go to David McCullough. We're going to go back to the Truman book for those following along at home and talking about the decision point, because I think it's important to talk about accountability, ownership, and the decision point for this action in World War II. This is on page 441, and there's some sections here. Halfway through the page, there's scientists that are debating the use of the atomic bomb. So one of the scientists says the following, and I believe this is a petition drawn up on the grounds of morality. So they're talking about the moral, and it goes into this quote here. And this is not from Truman himself. This is from the scientist. He goes, "It's hard to imagine anything more conclusive than the devastation of all the eastern coastal cities of Japan by firebombs. A more fiendish hell than the inferno of blazing Tokyo is beyond the pale of conception. Then why do we attempt to draw the line of morality here, when it is a question of degree, not a question of kind?" So what he's saying is that if we're going to bomb Tokyo anyway, this isn't about whether we're going to do it or not. It's just how extreme it's going to be. And it's that sort of objective. He's saying it's the scale. That's all this question is the scale. So it would seem this scientist is for the use of the bomb because we're already past the bombing of Tokyo and these other things. Then there's the other scientist, of course. It says, in a poll of 150 scientists at the Metallurgical Laboratory at Chicago, 87% voted for military use of the weapon. That's what McCullough writes. If other means failed to bring surrender. Arthur Compton was asked for his opinion, and this is Arthur Compton's opinion on the matter. What a question to answer. Having been in the very midst of these discussions, it seemed to me that a firm negative stand on my part might still prevent an atomic attack on Japan. Thoughts of my pacifist Mennonite ancestors flashed through my mind. I knew all too well the destruction and human agony the bombs would cause. I knew the danger they held in the hands of some future tyrant. These facts I had been living with for 4 years, but I wanted the war to end. I wanted life to become normal again. I hoped that by the use of the bombs, many fine young men I knew might be released at once from the demands of war, and thus be given a chance to live and not to die. So that's one of, obviously, the scientists working on the project. I think we understand why McCullough uses this statement.
Yeah, because we have to think we've been exploring the culture of the country in that time, and you can see that come through. You can see that come through. Like that's where people were. The war had been going on for a while now.
Right.
It was atrocious. We had young men dying, we had women at home giving birth to fatherless children.
Yeah.
This is and the fact that they're talking about it and discussing it at that time is good.
Yeah.
But we see what happened now, and his prediction came true.
There's a question mark. We have the ability to destroy the world as the human race, and hopefully no one does. But it's incredibly scary. It was scary at the time, and they understood that. And we think back to that paper, the headline, right? The moral question comes first before the news about what actually happened. Now that's the scientists. But of course, we have to think what is in the mind of the three big world leaders, right? Truman, Churchill, and Stalin. And where are they? They're still in Potsdam. They're meeting right now. So the next page, the very next page, if you're following along, if you have this at home, page 442, it starts with Churchill. Churchill was to write of the decision that was no decision. And in retrospect, this seems to have been the case. This is McCullough's writing there. The historic fact remains and must be judged in the aftertime, Churchill wrote, that the decision whether or not to use the atomic bomb to compel the surrender of Japan was never an issue. There was unanimous, automatic, unquestioned agreement around our table, nor did I ever hear the slightest suggestion that we should do otherwise. So Churchill, it's the first part that I kind of had to reread what he'd just written here, what Churchill said. The historic fact remains and must be judged in the aftertime. It's just a fact. We're going to use it. That's it. That's interesting. So just hearing, McCulloch provide the Churchill context. And then this is George Elsie, one of the other guys there. Truman made no decision because there was no decision to be made, recalled George Elsie, remembering the atmosphere of the moment. He could no more have stopped it than a train moving down a track. It's all well and good to come along later and say the bomb was a horrible thing. The whole goddamn war was a horrible thing. For his part, Truman stated later, the final decision of where and when to use the atomic bomb was up to me. What a level of ownership. He doesn't say, it was me. Let there be no mistake about it. This is Truman himself. I regarded the bomb as a military weapon and never had any doubt that it should be used. The top military advisors to the president recommended its use, and when I talked to Churchill, he unhesitatingly told me that he favored the use of the atomic bomb if it might aid to end the war. And then it says, though nothing, this is back to McCulloch, because that was Truman's statement, just the ability to take ownership of that. I think we'd expect nothing left of a person of this character. It continues, though nothing was recorded on paper, the critical moment appears to have occurred at number 2 Kaiserstrasse, because remember, they're in Germany at the time, later in the morning of Tuesday, July 24th, when at 11:30, the combined American and British chiefs of staff convened with Truman and Churchill in the dining room. This was the one time when Truman, Churchill, and their military advisors were all around a table, in Churchill's phrase. From this point, it was settled. Barring some unforeseen development, the bomb would be used within a few weeks. Truman later told Arthur Compton, he was the scientist that mentioned the pacifism just earlier, that the day of the decision was the same day he informed Stalin, and that occurred late the afternoon of the 24th. It happened at the end of a particularly contentious session at the Sicilienhof Palace. The meeting was just breaking up when Truman rose from his chair and alone walked slowly around the table to where Stalin stood with his interpreter. And mind you, this is like one of the first times, if not the first time Truman's even met Stalin. Remember, he's in Europe for like the first time since World War I. I casually mentioned to Stalin that we had a new weapon of unusual destructive force, Truman remembered. All he said was that he was glad to hear it and hoped we would make good use of it against the Japanese. Truman did not specify what kind of weapon it was. He did not use the words atomic bomb or say anything about sharing scientific secrets. Stalin seemed neither surprised nor the least curious. He did not ask the nature of the weapon or how it was made or why he hadn't been told before this. He did not suggest that Soviet scientists be informed or permitted to examine it. He did not, in fact, appear at all interested. And this, of course, is because Stalin already has spies. He already knew. And then if I just fast forward one little section here, because it's such a fascinating portion of our history that I think we really need to understand, however uncomfortable it might be. On page 443, after a whole section about Stalin, it goes, in years to come, Truman often said that having made his decision about the bomb, he went to bed and slept soundly. He would be pictured retiring for the night at the White House, his mind clear that he had done the right thing. But in the strange nightmare house, and he puts nightmare in quotations, at Babelsberg, in the unremitting heat of the German summer, he was sleeping rather poorly and in considerably more turmoil than his later claims ever suggested. No one who played a part in the development of the bomb or in our decision to use it felt happy about it, recalled Jimmy Burns, who was quartered downstairs. We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world, Truman wrote in his diary on Wednesday, July 25th, the day the general military order was issued to the Air Force to proceed with the plan, and the quote, terrible was the word he would keep coming back to. He wondered if the bomb might be, quote, the fire of destruction prophesied in the Bible. As if to convince himself, he wrote of how it would be used on military targets only, which he knew to be only partly true. And then this is from Truman's diary. This weapon is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. So that absolutely happens. I've told the Secretary of War, Mr. Stimson, to use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target, and not women and children. Even if the Japs are savages, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic, we, as the leader of the world for the common welfare, cannot drop this terrible bomb on the old capital, Kyoto. McCullough's going to give us the context here. Or the new Tokyo, where the imperial palace had been spared thus far. He and I are in accord. The target will be a purely military one, and we will issue a warning statement asking the Japs to surrender and save lives. I'm sure they will not do that, but we will have given them a chance. It is certainly a good thing for the world that Hitler's crowd, or Stalin's, did not discover the atomic bomb. It seems to be the most terrible thing ever discovered, but it can be made useful. Whether this final thought, this is back to McCullough, that it could be made useful was his irrepressible native optimism and faith in progress coming to the fore, or yet another way of trying to convince himself, or both of these, or merely means useful to end the war, is open to question. And McCullough just leaves it ambiguous there.
Well, I mean, I think that's we're never going to know, but those are all very good observations.
Yeah, but to hear from Truman himself that this wasn't just, he dropped it, went to bed. This was never, nothing was ever that simple about it. And there's a bit of a relief that it was torment, obviously, to make that decision. I don't think there's any other word for it. Now, when the bomb is dropped, it's dropped on the B-29, the Enola Gay. People have probably heard that name before. It's that bomb called Little Boy. The code name was Little Boy. It was a uranium-235 atomic bomb. And the death rate here is 90,000 to 146,000 dead, somewhere in that range. That's for Hiroshima. Now, what I find is really amazing and interesting in the middle of all this is on August 8th, the same morning that they're talking about Hiroshima, the U.S. Senate ratifies the United Nations Charter and joins the United Nations. So in between the first and the second, the United States ratifies the decision to join the United Nations. So,
are you serious?
Right, like all of this is happening at the same time. And I was going through the history because I didn't want to miss this.
Yeah, that's very important.
U.S. becomes third nation to join the UN. And after World War I, there was a whole League of Nations that was designed, and the United States never joined it. So in between these big acts of the bombs being dropped, oh, yeah, by the way, we're going to join the United Nations. And once this war is over, we should probably, hopefully, all work together to not do the horrible things that are that has been done. But then on August 9th, the day after, that's when Fat Man is dropped on Nagasaki. Now, Truman authorized the use of Fat Man. That was a plutonium atomic bomb. But it's not written as much up as the other one simply because of, with regards to the order in the moment of the decision to use it. Because the decision to use the first one was also kind of simultaneously the decision to use the second one. He authorized the Army to use it. The Army made a decision about a strategic target and dropped it on Nagasaki. And he gets the report that this has occurred. So the order to use it is going through the Army. I believe going through the chain of command at that point. So there's not like a moment where he's like, we're going to use it, and then Hiroshima's already happened. It's already been authorized to use this type of weaponry. The military goes forward with their listed targets, understanding the authorization has already been given. And that was on a plane called the B-29 Boxcar, and that's the Fat Man. And from that, at Nagasaki, the range of deaths is estimated between 39,000 and 80,000. And
that was immediate. That wasn't.
Yeah.
That was immediate deaths, not a death from radiation in the months and years following.
And we understand why it's tough to get the numbers, because you can't enter the zone to get a count, really. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's all the after effects of radiation poisoning and everything else that happens. While this is going on, the Soviets they didn't declare war in Japan yet. They declare war in Japan on August 8th, the same day that the United States joins the UN. So imagine this timeline, right? You get word about Hiroshima. A day later, after the word finally breaks that this power in domestic United States time, August 7th, the headline comes up, oh my gosh, this bomb exists. August 8th, the headline is, it's been dropped in Hiroshima. Same day, the U.S. Senate ratifies the decision to go into the UN and joins the UN. Same day, August 8th, Russia declares war in Japan. And then the next day, Nagasaki happens. Right in a row. So there's so much, it's almost too much to take in at the time. Mm-hmm, that after a long war, 4 years into war for the United States from December 7th, 1941, everything's happening in the matter of days. But by August 14th, 1945, Truman announces the Japanese surrender. It's not clear what the take from the Japanese was after Hiroshima, after Nagasaki. This is over. Mm-hmm. If there was ever any doubt that the Japanese, we're going to fight it out to the end, or whatever discussion was going on, was their communication saying like, hey, we dropped are they going to give up after Hiroshima? It's clearly not clear if that's the case. Nagasaki happens. It's like, okay. 5 days later, we get the notice. And actually online you can listen to, it's one of the first radio broadcasts, the Emperor Hirohito, and it's translated at the bottom of the surrender saying, and it's in Japanese, of course. It's him speaking to his people saying, we're done. Like, that's it. So it did have the desired effect after the second one, which is no more, no land invasion of Japan. So on August 15th, the surrender broadcast is known, and that's victory in Japan over Japan Day. VJ Day is declared. And then we have the formal military surrender on September 2nd of 1945. That concludes. World War II is over, so
that's both theaters, like it's done.
Yeah. Now I should note here, because somehow we're still in the age of colonialism, as I was looking through the timeline, on August 17th of 1945, just as Japan is surrendering, and we don't get involved with this really, but Indonesia is apparently still belonging to the Netherlands, to the Dutch, and they declare their independence from the Netherlands and go into a 4-year war with the Dutch for independence. So at the end of the war, Indonesia is still a colonial entity of the Netherlands, is still a colonial location. And so it's like, see ya. And this is where we start to see the beginning of, I think, like the Southeast Asia, like these countries saying, we're done with colonialism, which we know is ultimately going to play out as we head into the history of like the 60s and things like that, Vietnam. Mm-hmm. A lot of this stuff is starting to happen right at the end of World War II. So we don't get involved, but like it's in between the military surrender. I was looking at that. It's in between the military surrender of Japan and the official VJ Day on August 15th is Indonesia's starting a new war with the Dutch to declare independence. And it's in that same area. So we get all of that going on. But we've ended World War II, Jamie. We ended.
Oh, we're done.
Oh my gosh. Goodness. And I have some artifacts here. Now, in the storyline, Lou's still in England, remember? Because he just wants to get home at this point. Get home to Sweetie. Get home to see if you'll be able to see the birth of your supposedly son. They all think it's a son.
They all think it's a boy.
But Lou's trunk was up in the attic from the Navy days. And tucked into the blankets were these. Oh. So, we know certainly these are Lou's medals from World War II. And I'll go through what each one of these are, and I'll put this photo up on the website. The first one is the Navy Good Conduct Medal. And there's 3 little stars on it. It's the image of a ship, and you'll be able to see this online in the center. There's a sailing vessel. It has 3 additional good conduct enlistments. And it's probably because he served 3 years, right? So each year, good conduct, things like that. That's what I would assume with that. 3 years of honorable service is required to earn that first one. So it's a red ribbon with the ship. The next one after this is the U.S. Naval Reserve Faithful Service Medal. Navy Reserves, that's a pretty standard one. Then we get into the campaign ones, and the one specific to World War II. This one features the red, white, and blue ribbon. This is actually called the American Campaign. So you had to have aggregate service in the United States for more than a year. He spent a lot of time at Ottumwa and Hutchinson. This is that campaign medal. Then we get to the fourth one, which has the parts of like green and red and black. And if people have grandparents that served in the war, they've probably seen some of these as well. This one is the European/African/Middle Eastern Campaign Medal. You would receive one of these if you had service in any of those theaters. Lou went to England before the war ended. European Campaign Medal. And then the last one was for any degree of service. This is the World War II Victory Medal. And of course, this is on a pin, so he could pin it to his uniform for official. But this was in his trunk with his blankets and his service. So these are Lou's World War II medals. So now since we ended the war, of course, he was probably issued these after the point of where we are in the letters here. But I think it's appropriate, since we're talking about the end of the war, to show Lou's medals there. And he has the ribbons. We do have Lou's dog tags.
Oh, look at that.
As well. Now, they're going to be in service for a bit, but these date back So we do have the dog tags as well, stamped with his information. And then he kind of made his own medal here. This was with them. And I'm going to bring up a picture of this so you can see it. He's inscribed and drawn a little flower here, and I think this is so sweet. And it's easier to see the inscription here. It's dated 1944, February 3rd, 1944. This was with his dog tags. He's somehow, because he works in the metal shop, right? He works around engines. Dear Kay, here's the spoonful of flour. He's got flour spelled as if it's for the kitchen, but he's got the picture of the flower in the corner. Back. I love you. And then you can see a little tiny, I think it says honey, actually. And this would have been on one of their anniversaries. This would have been their third anniversary here, actually, because they were married on the 3rd of December of 1943. He makes this little medal.
This was their first anniversary?
This would be their 3rd month anniversary.
Their 3rd month anniversary. Okay.
Yeah. But it was saved with the dog tag. She held on to that. So I thought that would be really a beautiful thing to bring up. I do have a few other photos to show. We were talking about the dropping of the atomic bombs, and I strongly suggest that people go check out in Independence, Missouri, if you're ever out by Kansas City, the Harry S. Truman Library, because they have the remaining piece of Fat Man that was dropped on Nagasaki. So there's a plug that was lime green to make, it has something to do with stability, and then they would switch it to a red one before it was dropped. And they have that there at the Harry Truman Library. I know we're going into a lot, but it's important for people to see these things, especially not everyone, I understand not everyone's going to get out to Independence, but here it is. So they have this in a room, and when you, if you're out there, please go to this, because when you walk into a room, it's like a cylindrical room. I remember this specifically. There's one thing in the center of the room. It's not that big. It's probably about like 10 feet, maybe a little bigger, or I guess all the way around. And the middle of it, and the only thing in it is that plug. And that's the plug from the Fat Man that was removed before it was dropped on Nagasaki, then on August 9th of 1945. It's that lime green. There's something eerie about looking at the last piece, which symbolizes the decision to drop it. But what's amazing and so emotional about walking into this room is around it are cranes. And in this photo, if you'll notice it, there's this amazing display, this imagery of the Japanese, the paper cranes, is a little tiny crane in the center. And they give a description of this. I have a zoom in of this. This is one of the victims. And she was at Hiroshima. She was hospitalized at age 11 with leukemia. So there's a legend in Japan that whoever folds 1,000 cranes will get a wish. And from her room, she folded more than 1,000. She wished for peace at the age of 12, and then she passes away. The item within that little case there, right next to the plug from the Fat Man in that same room, is one of the ones she folded. So, yeah. And that's the end of World War II. This is why we didn't want to go into the season finale until we ended World War II. But I think we can just let everybody think for themselves. I think it's always going to be a debate of history of what should or shouldn't have happened. And there's moral lines that some people will cross or not cross, depending on the situation. And there's principles that people have of whether they ever would have. The scientists, 87% said go ahead, 13% said no. This is always going to be one of those debates of history, but it's not one that we can be blind to what happened or the after effects. It's important for people to go to this site and go see that. With that, next week, season finale of season 1 of the Love Sweetie podcast. See you next week.